What up? What's up, fellas? Where y'all going?
You say their names, say Chambers looking for you, hey, they gone, they running, they be scared. You know? They will kill you in a minute with no hesitation.
30 words away, man, since now.
Well, I tell you what we can do. We can give it to the...
Sit your $5 down before I make change.
Authorities say the Chambers brothers who made this home video didn't even bother to count the $1 bills because it took too long.
Should we throw these words away, man, since we got $500,000?
Well, I tell you what we can do. We can give it to the poor.
More than 500 crack houses. They use violence and intimidation to discourage competitors.
New Jack City will always be remembered as a cult classic. There's no debate about that. Wesley Snipes owned the screen as Nino Brown, confident, calculated, and intimidating. The movie captured a certain era perfectly. But what most people don't realize is that it barely scratched the surface of the real story that inspired it. The true events behind it were far more complex, darker, and more intense than Hollywood was ever willing to fully show. The Chambers brothers were not just fictional characters or exaggerated street figures. They were operating on a completely different level. While many old-school players avoided the crack era because of how unstable and risky it was, the Chambers brothers went straight into it and treated it like a business opportunity. They didn't just participate in the game, they transformed it.
That racism was a real hard bad. Even at one time, one of my brothers was walking up the road. I'm in a little small town called Lee Range, Arkansas. A white guy and his friend was riding a motorcycle, actually deliberately ran over my brother. And nothing was dead, but that was the type of stuff that we could expect.
Detroit had never seen anything like what they built. At their peak, their operation was reportedly generating close to $250 million a year. That's not just success, that's influence on a massive scale. What makes it even more unbelievable is where they started. They came from Marianna, Arkansas, growing up in extreme poverty. 16 people crowded into a small cabin with no running water, limited food, and no comfort at all. Every day was about survival. Racism wasn't subtle or hidden. It was open, aggressive, and built into the environment around them.
Also had a club down there that was...
Correct.
What did they call it? A club or juke joint? What did
They call it a juke joint.
No one was coming to save them. If you wanted to move forward, you had to figure it out yourself. That's where the Chambers brothers learned how to adapt, hustle, and push through anything. From a young age, they understood that nothing would be handed to them. As kids, they found ways to make money however they could.
He was kind of known as the one that was kind of getting in trouble, in and out of jail. Like,
that was Larry. That was my oldest brother.
Okay,
they called Larry.
Working angles at their family's juke joint, running small hustles, and learning how to read people early. It wasn't about fun, it was about getting by. When their parents split and the juke joint shut down, most kids would have been broken by that moment. For Larry, Wiley, BJ, and Otis, it only fueled them more. Larry, the oldest, was intense and fearless. Wiley tried to take a more traditional route for a while, spending time in the military and even working as a mailman. But the pull of the streets eventually brought him back. BJ was the strategist, smooth, quick-thinking, and naturally persuasive. Otis, the youngest, was determined to prove he could stand shoulder to shoulder with his brothers. Together, they were a unit. Not loud, not flashy at first, but when they entered a room, people paid attention. Larry, however, stood apart. He was the risk taker, the rule breaker, the one drawn to danger.
It was just like, I'm done. I'm not going in this field no more, chopping no kites for nobody. You know what I'm saying now? And just took off. By him not having a game plan, just looking at his criminal record, he was doing a lot of break-ins at that time to survive.
While his brothers tested legitimate paths, Larry leaned fully into the streets, chasing the adrenaline and the freedom it gave him. That lifestyle caught up with him. After a job went wrong one Christmas Eve, Larry was taken into custody. For most people, that would have been the end. For Larry, it was just another obstacle. Days later, he escaped custody and disappeared back into the world he knew. Law enforcement caught up with him again, this time handing down a heavy sentence. But even then, Larry refused to break. Over time, his outlook shifted. Instead of letting confinement consume him, he redirected his energy. He focused inward, learning discipline, structure, and control.
He ran away.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I bet you he ran away at the age of 15 to the young lady house that I had met in Detroit.
You never really been around drugs?
No.
Things of that nature. So how did you get introduced to the drug game?
Well, the young lady that I had came and stayed with, her moms and their...
While Larry was changing on the inside, the rest of the brothers were making moves on the outside. Arkansas offered no future, so BJ Chambers made a decision that would change everything. He headed north to Detroit. At first, he found some success, but it wasn't until he carefully observed the shifting street economy that he realized how much opportunity existed. BJ didn't rush. He studied. He watched how supply moved, how demand exploded, and how disorganized most operations were. With the right connections and family support, he prepared to make a move that would reshape Detroit entirely. When the Chambers brothers finally stepped into the game, they didn't ease in. They took control. Outsiders underestimated them, seeing only small-town newcomers. That mistake didn't last long.
Do you feel like the most y'all ever brought in a day?
Well, we had got to a point where we was making at least $250,000 per day, every day.
Damn.
Their operation expanded rapidly. What looked like ordinary neighborhood businesses on the surface were actually structured hubs feeding a massive network. BJ ran it with precision. Everyone had a role. Everything had a system. By the mid-1980s, their reach had grown to hundreds of locations across the city, pulling in massive daily revenue. It wasn't chaos, it was organized, efficient, and relentless. But while the brothers rose, entire neighborhoods paid the price. What once looked like a success story from nothing slowly revealed itself as something far more destructive. Every dollar the Chambers brothers made came from neighborhoods slowly breaking apart. Entire communities were hurting, and the streets were paying the price for their rise. Then, in 1986, everything changed. Their younger brother, Little Joe, passed away. His loss hit the family hard, but the farewell was impossible to ignore. The funeral was extravagant. Stretched limousines, custom suits, heavy jewelry, first-class treatment from start to finish. It looked less like a goodbye and more like a public display of power. The message was clear to anyone watching. The Chambers brothers were untouchable. After the funeral, they returned to Detroit colder, sharper, and more aggressive than ever. They brought in new recruits, expanded their reach, and pushed even harder for dominance. But by then, their reputation had turned into a spotlight. They weren't moving quietly anymore. They were visible, bold, and impossible to miss. Authorities didn't need to search for them. The brothers were operating in plain sight, and that's when the cracks began to show. Their downfall didn't start with some secret operation. It started from within. Larry's former partner, Patricia Middleton, decided to cooperate with investigators. She laid everything out: how the operation worked, where the money flowed, who handled what, and how the entire structure stayed together. It was a roadmap straight into the heart of the empire. Even then, it might have taken longer to bring everything down if not for one massive mistake. Larry and his main enforcer, Jack Frost, became reckless. They began recording themselves, not audio, video, footage showing piles of cash, expensive homes, luxury cars, and the lifestyle they believed proved their success. What they saw as trophies became evidence. Those recordings handed prosecutors exactly what they needed. The brothers had unknowingly documented their own operation in full detail. By the early 1990s, the momentum stopped. The streets that once whispered their name fell silent. When law enforcement finally moved, it was fast and decisive. BJ and Otis were taken first. Wiley, who still tried to maintain a legitimate image, was approached while working his postal job. Larry, already incarcerated, became the central figure of the case. Raids followed across Detroit. Properties, stash locations, and luxury residences were searched. The scale was staggering. Authorities seized over $1 million in cash, along with high-end jewelry, watches, and vehicles. The empire collapsed not because of rivals, but because it had grown too visible. More details surfaced as the case expanded. Dozens of vehicles were confiscated. Hundreds of weapons were recovered. Hidden cash was found tucked away throughout their network. The numbers told a story of excess and unchecked confidence. At a press conference, Detroit Police Chief William Hart praised the operation as a major victory. Cameras flashed, headlines celebrated the takedown. But irony followed close behind. Not long after, Hart himself was exposed for financial misconduct tied to his own department and later served time. The trials began in October 1988. The courtroom was packed. The charges were heavy: conspiracy, large-scale trafficking, financial violations. Witnesses described an environment ruled by fear and discipline. Some testimony was difficult to hear. Others never made it to the stand at all. By the time sentencing arrived, the outcome was unavoidable. The Chambers brothers were finished. Larry received a life sentence without release. BJ was sentenced to decades behind bars. Wiley and Otis were also handed long terms. The name that once dominated Detroit's underground was reduced to case files and court records. Still, the story wasn't fully over. Years later, some sentences were adjusted, and a few brothers eventually returned home to a city that no longer resembled the one they left. After serving more than 2 decades, he finally walked free in July 2010, stepping outside at 48 years old into a world that no longer resembled the one he left behind. The symbols of power were gone. No luxury cars, no jewelry, no crowds. Just a quiet exit into a city that had moved on without him pasted. Detroit had changed. The blocks they once controlled didn't feel familiar anymore. New faces ran the streets, and many of them barely remembered the Chambers' name. The money that once flowed endlessly was either spent, seized, or locked away as evidence. What remained were memories, stories passed down like echoes, reminders of how quickly dominance can disappear. Larry, once the most unpredictable and intense of the brothers, remained locked away as the years continued to pass. Meanwhile, Wiley, BJ, and Otis chose a different path after returning home. They stayed quiet, lived privately, and avoided attention. The chaos, the spotlight, and the pressure were behind them. But the weight of the past never fully leaves. Their story didn't vanish. It transformed into a lesson, a modern cautionary tale about ambition, power, and how far things can go when momentum outruns control. That rise and collapse didn't just stay in the streets. It reached pop culture in a lasting way. Their real-life story inspired one of the most iconic films of the early 1990s, New Jack City. Behind that film was Barry Michael Cooper, a journalist turned screenwriter who didn't just observe the era, he documented it. During the height of the crack era, Cooper wasn't chasing headlines. He was capturing reality as it unfolded in communities like Harlem and Detroit. The hunger, the pressure, the survival, all of it became the foundation for his storytelling. New Jack City wasn't just entertainment. It reflected a moment in time with honesty and intensity. Wesley Snipes, as Nino Brown, brought that world to life, not as a cartoon villain, but as a symbol of how power and ambition can reshape a person. Cooper followed that film with Sugar Hill in 1994. Another layered story focused on two brothers trying to escape a cycle that kept pulling them back. That same year, Cooper released Above the Rim, a raw basketball drama starring a young Tupac Shakur, exploring the thin line between opportunity and temptation. Together, these films became known as Cooper's Harlem Trilogy, a cinematic snapshot of an era where dreams, danger, and desire collided. What made Cooper's work hit so hard wasn't just the subject matter, but the way he told it. He blended literary depth with street-level truth. One moment philosophical, the next brutally direct. Critics later said he wasn't just writing stories. He was translating an entire world for the screen. Before film, there was journalism. His groundbreaking article, Kids Killing Kids, exposed how young people were pulled into fast-moving underground economies, changing the language and conversation around the era forever. That article helped introduce the term New Jack, a phrase that would go on to define a generation. New Jack City became more than a hit. It became a cultural shift. It proved that stories from overlooked communities could be powerful, stylish, and deeply human. Barry Michael Cooper passed away in January 2021, but his voice still lives on through his work. Through film, dialogue, and culture, he gave visibility to stories that demanded to be told. And through stories like the Chambers brothers, that legacy continues to remind us how quickly power can rise, and how just as quickly it can fall. If this story made you think, drop your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy deep dives like this, and let us know which story you want covered next.